The massive arena on Omega-7 space station buzzed with excitement. Thousands of alien beings filled the viewing seats, their voices creating a sound like thunder across the metal walls. In the center of it all sat Commander Thexval of the Vorthak Empire, his 12-foot frame covered in natural armor that gleamed under the bright lights. For 300 years, no one had defeated a Vorthak warrior in single combat. Not once. The Vorthak Empire had grown across the galaxy using this simple rule: send your best fighter to face theirs. Win and join the galaxy as equals. Lose and become servants of the Empire. Every species had tried. Every species had failed. Thexval watched as his current champion finished off another challenger. Grimskull the Bone Crusher stood over the remains of what used to be a warrior from the Crystal People. The Vorthak champion was a terrifying sight. His body was part living creature and part machine, with plasma claws that could cut through starship metal like paper. His muscles were enhanced with biotechnology that made him stronger than any natural being had a right to be. The crowd cheered as medical teams rushed onto the arena floor to clean up what was left of the Crystal Warrior. This was how it always ended. Quick, brutal, and completely one-sided. Thexval barely looked up from his reports. Another species had learned their place in the galaxy. Another world would bow to Vorthak rule. It was also routine now that he found it boring. His aide, a smaller Vorthak named Klex, approached the command throne. "My lord, the next challenger is ready." "What species this time?" Thexval asked without interest. "The rock people? The gas breathers? Another batch of those flying creatures from Sector 7? The records say, Terrans, my lord. They are new to our space, from somewhere far out on the galaxy's edge." Now Thexval looked up. New species were always interesting, at least for a few minutes. They usually brought new fighting styles or technologies that might provide some entertainment before Grimskull tore them apart. "Show me," he commanded. The main viewing screen switched to show the challenger's waiting area. What Thexval saw made his four eyes blink in surprise. The creature standing there was tiny, barely 6 feet tall, which made it smaller than most Vorthak children. It had pale skin, black hair, and was wearing simple clothes that looked like they were made from plant fibers and basic synthetic materials. "This is their champion?" Thexval laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Are you sure this is not some kind of joke?" Klex checked his datapad. "No joke, my lord. The Terrans call this one Dae-Hyun. He is their official representative for the combat trial." The human looked completely out of place in the warrior's waiting area. He sat calmly on a metal bench, his hands folded in his lap. While other challengers had spent their waiting time roaring, flexing, or performing intimidation rituals, this Dae-Hyun simply sat there. His eyes were closed as if he was sleeping or thinking about something peaceful. Around the arena, other alien representatives were also staring at their screens in confusion. The betting pools, which usually favored the Vorthak by huge margins, were now completely one-sided. No one was willing to bet even a single credit on the human. "Look at it," laughed Rextar, the representative from the Spike Kingdoms. "Does it even have natural weapons? I see no claws, no fangs, no acid sacs, no poison spines." "Maybe it has hidden technology," suggested Yilmoth from the Hive Worlds. "Some kind of energy weapon or personal shield." "The scanners show nothing," Klex reported to Thexval. "No weapons, no armor, no biomodifications, no technological enhancements. It appears to be completely natural and unmodified." Thexval felt a moment of confusion. In 3 centuries of combat trials, no species had ever sent an unenhanced natural fighter against a Vorthak champion. It was suicide. Either these Terrans were incredibly stupid, or they knew something that no one else in the galaxy knew. "Bring up everything we know about this species," he ordered. The information that appeared on his screen was frustratingly limited. The Terrans had only been contacted 6 months ago by a routine exploration ship. Their home world was listed as a Class M planet with standard gravity, atmosphere, and temperature ranges. Nothing special, nothing that would produce superior warriors. "What does their diplomatic file say about their military capabilities?" Thexval asked. "Very little, my lord. They seem to prefer talking to fighting. Their ships carry defensive weapons only. No planet cracker bombs, no biological warfare systems, no reality warping technology. They appear to be a peaceful farming and trading species." This made even less sense. Peaceful species usually sent their challenges as a formality, knowing they would lose but hoping to negotiate better terms of surrender. They did not send fighters who looked this calm and confident. Down in the arena, The cleanup crews finished their work and the automated systems began preparing for the next combat. Atmosphere processors adjusted the air mixture to accommodate both Vorthak and Terran biology. Gravity remained at standard galactic level. The arena floor, stained with the blood of 1,000 defeated challengers, gleamed under fresh cleaning. Grimskull took his position at one end of the combat circle. The champion stood perfectly still, but his bio-enhanced muscles rippled with barely contained power. His plasma claws glowed with deadly energy. His enhanced senses tracked every movement in the arena, ready to respond to any threat with overwhelming violence. At the other end of the circle, Daehyun walked onto the arena floor. The size difference was shocking. Grimskull was twice as tall and at least 4 times as heavy as the human. The Vorthak champion looked like he could step on his opponent and not even notice. But something was wrong with this picture. Grimskull, who had never shown fear in over 100 victories, seemed uncertain. His enhanced sensors were telling him something that his brain could not understand. The small human walking toward him moved like a predator. Not the clumsy stumbling of most bipeds, but the smooth, flowing motion of something that had been born to hunt. The crowd fell silent as they noticed it too. This human did not move like prey. He moved like something that had never been prey in its entire evolutionary history. Thexval leaned forward in his throne. "What are you?" he whispered. The arena's announcement system activated. Combatants prepare for engagement. Standard rules apply. Victory by death, surrender, or incapacitation. Begin in 10 seconds. Daehyun stopped walking and stood perfectly still. He looked up at Grimskull, and for the first time since entering the arena, his eyes opened fully. What the watching aliens saw in those eyes would haunt them for years to come. There was no fear, no anger, no hatred or bloodlust or any of the emotions they expected to see in a creature facing certain death. Instead, there was something far more terrifying. Perfect, calm calculation. The eyes of something that had looked at Grimskull and already decided exactly how this fight was going to end. 5 seconds, announced the arena. System. Grimskull raised his plasma claws and prepared to end this quickly. Begin combat. What happened next would change the galaxy forever. The word begin had barely finished echoing through the arena when Grimskull moved. The Vorthak champion launched himself forward with the speed of a missile. His bio-enhanced legs pushed him across the combat circle in less than a second. His plasma claws, glowing white-hot with deadly energy, swept toward the human's chest in an arc that should have cut Daehyun in half. But Daehyun was not there. The human had moved at the exact moment Grimskull began his attack, not backward or to the side like most fighters would do, but forward and down. He slipped under the deadly claws like water flowing around a rock. His body seemed to bend in ways that should not have been possible for a creature with bones. Grimskull's claws cut through empty air where the human had been standing just a moment before. The champion's momentum carried him forward, his massive form suddenly off balance. He had been so certain of a quick kill that he had put all his strength into that first attack. The crowd gasped in surprise. No one had ever avoided Grimskull's opening attack before. Most challengers were dead before they even knew the fight had started. But Daehyun was just getting started. As Grimskull stumbled forward, trying to recover his balance, the human moved again. His feet found purchase on the arena floor, and he flowed upward like smoke rising from a fire. His right hand formed a perfect spear shape with his fingers pressed together. That hand shot out and found a gap in Grimskull's armor that was barely wide enough for a finger to fit through. The strike lasted for less than 1/10 of a second. Daehyun's fingers touched a specific point on Grimskull's neck, just below the base of his skull. Then the human was gone again, flowing away from his opponent like he was made of liquid. Grimskull roared and spun around to face his enemy. But something was wrong. His left arm hung limp at his side. The bio-enhanced muscles that had crushed starship hulls would not respond to his commands. Impossible, breathed Thexval from his throne. He had watched every one of Grimskull's fights. The champion's nervous system was protected by layers of organic armor and synthetic shielding. Nothing could damage it without first cutting through inches of the toughest biological material in the known galaxy. Yet somehow, with a single touch, this small human had done exactly that. Grimskull tested his left arm, trying to force it to work. The limb twitched but remained mostly useless. His enhanced senses ran diagnostic checks on his body systems. The results made no sense. There was no damage to his armor. No cuts, no burns, no sign of any weapon impact. Yet his nervous system was reporting massive disruption along his left side. The crowd had fallen completely silent. Thousands of beings from dozens of species watched in shock as their understanding of combat was turned upside down. This was not how fights worked. Challengers were supposed to die quickly and messily. They were not supposed to disable Vorthak champions with gentle touches. Daehyun stood about 10 feet away from Grimskull, his breathing steady and calm. He had not even broken a sweat. His simple clothes were not torn or dirty. He looked like someone taking a peaceful walk in a garden, not someone fighting for his species' freedom. But his eyes told a different story. Those calm, calculating eyes were studying Grimskull like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. The human was learning. Every second of the fight was teaching him something new about his opponent. Grimskull decided to end this strangeness with overwhelming force. He activated his emergency combat systems, flooding his body with battle stimulants that would triple his speed and strength. His plasma claws blazed brighter as additional power flowed through them. His one good arm swelled with enhanced muscle mass. The champion charged again, but this time he used a different strategy. Instead of a single powerful strike, he unleashed a flurry of attacks. His right claw swept high while his right leg kicked low. His tail, armed with a bone spike, whipped around from the side. Even with only one arm working, he could still attack from 3 directions at once. This attack pattern had never failed him before. No living creature could avoid strikes coming from 3 different angles at the same time. Daehyun avoided all 3. The human moved like he was dancing to music only he could hear. His body bent and twisted in ways that looked impossible. He ducked under the high claw strike while stepping over the low kick. As the spiked tail whipped toward him, he simply was not there anymore. But this time the human did not just dodge. As Grimskull's attacks missed their target, Daehyun moved closer. His hands shot out in a series of lightning-fast strikes. Each touch looked gentle, almost like he was patting Grimskull in a friendly way. The effect was devastating. Grimskull's right leg went numb. Then his tail stopped responding. His enhanced senses began reporting system failures throughout his body. Whatever the human was doing to him, it was spreading. The champion tried to back away, but his legs would not obey him properly. He stumbled and nearly fell. His enhanced healing systems were working frantically to repair the damage, but they could not fix what they could not understand. "What is he doing?" Rexstar whispered to his aide. "What kind of weapon is this?" "I do not think it is a weapon," his aide replied. "I think it is knowledge." In his throne, Thexval was running every combat analysis program the Vorthak Empire had developed over 3 centuries of warfare. None of them could explain what he was seeing. The human was not using any technology. He was not enhanced with biomodifications. He was not even particularly strong by galactic standards. Yet, he was systematically destroying the most feared warrior in the galaxy using nothing but his bare hands and perfect timing. Grimskull made one last desperate attack. He gathered all his remaining strength and launched himself at the human in a tackle that should have crushed every bone in Daehyun's body. The human stepped to the side at the last possible moment. As Grimskull flew past him, Daehyun's elbow came down in a precise strike to the base of the champion's skull. It was the same spot he had touched at the beginning of the fight, but this time he put more force behind it. Grimskull hit the arena floor with a crash that shook the entire viewing area. The champion's body twitched once, then lay still. The arena was so quiet that the hum of the air recycling system sounded like thunder. Daehyun stood over his fallen opponent, checking to make sure Grimskull was still breathing. The champion was unconscious but alive. The human stepped back and waited. Medical teams rushed onto the arena floor. Their scanners confirmed what everyone could see. Grimskull was defeated but not dead. His nervous system had been overloaded by strikes that targeted specific pressure points with surgical precision. The lead medic looked up at the viewing area and announced the result that would echo across the galaxy. Grimskull the Bone Crusher is unable to continue combat. Victory goes to the Terran representative. For the first time in 300 years, a Vorthak champion had been defeated, and the human who did it looked like he had barely tried. News of Grimskull's defeat spread across the galaxy faster than light could travel. Emergency communication networks that had been silent for decades suddenly blazed with activity. Species that had lived under Vorthak rule for generations whispered the impossible word: hope. On distant worlds, slaves looked up at the stars and wondered if freedom might actually be possible. Resistance groups that had been hiding in caves and ruins began to plan for the first time in centuries. The unthinkable had happened. A Vorthak champion had fallen. But on Omega-7 space station, Commander Thexaval was far from finished. "Send emergency signals to all combat stations," he ordered his aide Klex. "I want every available champion here within 6 hours." "My lord, perhaps we should consider negotiating with these Terrans," Klex suggested carefully. "If they can defeat Grimskull, maybe they deserve to be treated as equals rather than vassals." Thexval's 4 eyes blazed with anger. "The Vorthak Empire does not negotiate with primitives. We rule because we are superior. One lucky victory changes nothing." Within hours, 3 more Vorthak champions had arrived at Omega-7. Each one was a legend in their own right. Razorclaw the Flesh Ripper had torn apart entire armies on 12 different worlds. Venom Spitter the Acidic could dissolve solid metal with his breath. Bonecrusher Prime had never needed more than 1 attack to end any fight. The 3 champions stood together in the arena preparation area, studying video recordings of Daehyun's fight with Grimskull. They watched the human's strange movements over and over, trying to understand what they were seeing. "He moves like liquid," Razorclaw observed. His voice sounded like grinding stone, but liquid with purpose, like it knows exactly where it needs to flow. "The strikes make no sense," added Venom Spitter. "No force behind them. No weapons. Yet they disable our brother completely." Bonecrusher Prime said nothing. He was the largest of the 3 champions, standing nearly 15 feet tall and weighing as much as a small vehicle. He had studied warfare for 2 centuries and considered himself an expert on all forms of combat. But what he had seen in the recordings did not match any fighting style in his vast database. Meanwhile, the human delegation had received a message from Commander Thexaval. The Vorthak leader was formally challenging them to another combat trial. This time, Daehyun would face all 3 champions at once. The human diplomatic observer, a woman named Su-Jin, read the challenge without showing any emotion. She was small even by human standards, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. She looked like someone who had spent her life helping others, not planning military strategies. "Will your champion accept?" asked Yilmoth from the Hive Worlds. 3 opponents at once is unprecedented. Even if your fighter is skilled, the numbers are impossible." Su-Jin looked at him with what might have been pity. "Representative Yilmoth, you are thinking about this wrong. You believe 3 opponents make this harder for Daehyun?" "Of course they do," Rexstar interrupted. "Simple mathematics. 3 attackers means 3 times the danger." "No," Su-Jin said quietly. 3 opponents means Daehyun no longer has to hold back as much." The alien representative stared at her in confusion. "Hold back?" The human had just defeated the most feared warrior in the galaxy, and he had been holding back. "What do you mean?" asked Klex, who had been sent to negotiate with the humans. Su-Jin stood up and walked to the viewing window that looked down into the arena. "Your people have been fighting for conquest for so long that you have forgotten what real fighting looks like. You think combat is about strength and weapons and intimidation." She pointed down at the arena floor, where workers were setting up barriers and obstacles for a multi-opponent battle. "Humans learned to fight for survival. Every day for millions of years our world tried to kill us. We had to become very good at staying alive." "But surely one being cannot defeat 3 champions," Yilmoth insisted. "Watch and learn," Su-Jin replied. Down in the arena, the 3 Vorthak champions took their positions. They had developed a strategy during their preparation time. Razorclaw would attack from the front to keep the human busy. Venom Spitter would circle around and attack from behind with his acid breath. Bonecrusher Prime would wait for the perfect moment to end the fight with one devastating blow. It was a good plan. It should have worked. Daehyun entered the arena through the same entrance he had used before. He looked exactly the same as in his first fight. Same simple clothes, same calm expression, same steady breathing. But the alien spectators who had watched his first battle noticed something different in his eyes. Where before there had been calculation and focus, now there was something deeper, something that made primitive parts of their brains scream warnings about predators and death and things that hunted in the darkness. "Combatants, prepare for engagement," announced the arena system, multiple opponent scenario. "Standard rules apply. Begin in 10 seconds. The 3 champions spread out in their planned formation. Razorclaw flexed his mechanical claws. Venom Spitter's throat sac swelled with deadly acid. Bone Crusher Prime's muscles bulged with enhanced power. Dae-hyun stood perfectly, still in the center of the arena, and closed his eyes. 5 seconds. The human took a deep breath and spoke too, words that only the most sensitive audio pickups could detect. Engagement 7. Begin combat. What happened next would be studied by military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. But in the moment, it was simply impossible to follow with normal eyes. Dae-hyun moved like he was no longer bound by the laws of physics. He flowed between the three champions like smoke in a hurricane. Razor Claw's claws cut through empty air. Venom Spitter's acid spray missed its target by inches. Bone Crusher Prime's massive fists pounded nothing but arena floor. But the human was not just avoiding attacks. He was using them. When Razor Claw swiped at where Dae-hyun had been, the human guided that momentum into Venom Spitter's path. When Bone Crusher Prime charged forward, Dae-hyun made sure the giant champion collided with his own allies. The three champions, who had trained together for decades, found themselves fighting each other as much as their intended target. Every time they tried to coordinate an attack, the human turned their teamwork against them. And through it all, Dae-hyun struck back. Not with angry wild swings, but with precise touches that found exactly the right pressure points on each opponent. His fingers found gaps in armor that the champions did not even know existed. His strikes targeted nerve clusters that Vorthak medical science had thought were unreachable. Within minutes, Razor Claw's left arm had gone completely numb. Venom Spitter could no longer control his acid production properly. Bone Crusher Prime's legs were shaking with muscle spasms. The watching aliens realized they were not observing a fight. They were watching a master craftsman at work. Dae-hyun was taking apart 3 of the galaxy's most dangerous warriors with the same calm precision that a technician might use to repair a broken machine. When the end came, it was almost anticlimactic. Bone Crusher Prime made one final desperate charge, trying to crush the human with his enormous bulk. Dae-hyun stepped aside at the last moment and delivered a single strike to the base of the giant's skull. Bone Crusher Prime collapsed like a falling building. His unconscious body crashed into both Razor Claw and Venom Spitter, knocking them to the ground in a tangle of limbs and armor. Dae-hyun stood over the 3 defeated champions, his breathing only slightly faster than normal. His clothes were not even wrinkled. He looked like someone who had just finished a light exercise routine, not someone who had single-handedly defeated 3 legendary warriors. The arena was completely silent except for the groaning of the fallen champions and the hum of medical sensors. Atsujin's voice carried clearly through the viewing area's communication system. As I said, 3 opponents meant he did not have to hold back as much. Commander Thexval stared down at the arena floor, where his 3 greatest champions lay defeated. His mind struggled to process what he had witnessed. This went beyond superior fighting technique. This was something else entirely. "What are you people?" he whispered. In the diplomatic viewing area, Sujin smiled. It was not a cruel smile, but it was not entirely kind either. "We are humans," she said simply, "and you have not seen anything yet." Commander Thexval sat in his command chair, staring at reports that made no sense. 4 of his greatest champions had fallen to a single human warrior. The impossible had become routine. His 300-year legacy of Vorthak dominance was crumbling before his eyes. But Thexval had not built an empire by giving up when things became difficult. "Activate Protocol 9, he ordered his aide. Klex's eyes widened in shock. "My lord, Protocol 9 has not been used since the Great Rebellion 2 centuries ago. The Galactic Council will consider it an act of war." "The Galactic Council can consider whatever they wish," Thexval snarled. "I will not let one primitive destroy everything we have built." Protocol 9 was simple and brutal. Instead of sending individual champions to fight, the Vorthak would deploy an entire combat unit. 50 warriors, each one a veteran of dozens of planetary conquests. If one human could defeat their champions through skill and precision, then they would overwhelm him with numbers. Emergency transport beams began materializing warriors directly into the arena. Each beam brought another armored figure carrying weapons that could level city blocks. These were not ceremonial fighters trained for arena combat. These were soldiers who had crushed rebellions and conquered worlds. The arena's safety systems began screaming warnings. The combat zone was designed for single combat between two beings. 50 armed warriors exceeded every safety protocol in the station's database. "Sir, we should evacuate the viewing areas," Kleck suggested as alarms wailed throughout the station. "No," Thexval replied. "Let them watch. Let the galaxy see what happens when someone challenges the Vorthak Empire." In the diplomatic viewing area, alien representatives began rushing toward the exits. This was no longer a formal combat trial. This was warfare, and they wanted no part of it. But Sujin remained in her seat watching calmly as 50 Vorthak soldiers took positions around the arena floor. She seemed completely unconcerned by the massive escalation. "Sujin," called out Yilmoth as he headed for the door, "you need to leave. This is not safe anymore." The human woman looked up at him with those same kind eyes. "Representative Yilmoth, you are about to witness something that will change galactic history forever. You should stay. Are you insane?" Rexstar shouted from the exit. 50 soldiers against one fighter. "Your champion is brave, but this is suicide." Sujin touched a small device on her wrist and spoke into it. "Daehyun, we have 50 opponents this time. Do you need me to adjust the engagement protocol?" The human's voice came back clear and calm through the communication system. 50, that changes things. "Please authorize Protocol 5, are you sure?" Sujin asked. "Protocol 5 has not been tested in real combat conditions." "I am sure." Sujin hesitated for a moment, then spoke into her device. "Protocol 5 is authorized. Engagement parameters are now active." Rexstar paused at the exit. "Protocol 5? What does that mean?" "It means," Sujin said quietly, "that Daehyun no longer has to pretend to be fighting fair." Down in the arena, the 50 Vorthak soldiers had formed a perfect battle formation. They carried plasma rifles, energy shields, and close combat weapons. Their armor was designed to withstand direct hits from starship weapons. Their tactical computers were linked together, allowing them to coordinate their attacks with precision. Daehyun stood alone in the center of the arena, completely surrounded. For the first time since arriving at Omega 7, he looked small and vulnerable. A single figure facing an army, but something was different about him now. Where before he had moved with calm precision, now there was something else in his movements, something that made the Vorthak soldiers shift nervously, despite their overwhelming advantage. The arena announcer's voice crackled over the communication system. "Combat will begin in 30 seconds. Multiple combatant scenario with military-grade equipment authorized." Daehyun closed his eyes and took 3 deep breaths. When he opened them again, the watching aliens saw something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. The human was no longer pretending to be civilized. "Begin combat," announced. The arena system, 50 plasma rifles fired at once, filling the air with deadly energy beams that should have vaporized any living creature. Daehyun was not there when they arrived. What happened next was impossible to follow with normal eyes. The human moved like he had become part of the arena itself. He flowed through the gaps between energy beams like he could see them coming before they were fired. He used the arena's walls, ceiling, and floor as weapons, redirecting attacks and turning the Vorthak soldiers' own firepower against them. But it was not just his movement that had changed. Daehyun was using the environment in ways that defied understanding. He triggered arena maintenance systems to create obstacles. He caused lighting panels to overload and explode at exactly the right moments. He turned the station's own gravity generators against the soldiers, making them stumble and fall at critical moments. The Vorthak formation began to break apart as soldiers found themselves fighting not just the human, but the arena itself. Equipment malfunctioned at the worst possible times. Weapons fired when they were not supposed to. Communication systems fed false information to tactical computers. And through it all, Daehyun moved like a force of nature. His strikes were no longer the gentle touches he had used against individual champions. Now he hit with enough force to crack armor and send armored soldiers flying across the arena floor. Commander Thexval watched in growing horror as his elite soldiers were systematically destroyed. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "He is just one being." "No," said Kleck, studying the tactical displays. "Look at the sensor readings. He is not fighting them one at a time. He is fighting all 50 as a single organism." It was true. Somehow Daehyun was tracking and responding to 50 different opponents simultaneously. His tactical awareness extended across the entire arena. He knew where every soldier was, what they were planning to do, and how to counter their moves before they even made them. Within 10 minutes, 20 soldiers were down. Within 15 minutes, 30 more had fallen. The remaining fighters tried to retreat to defensive positions, but there was nowhere to hide from something that seemed to know their thoughts before they did. When the last Vorthak soldier fell unconscious to the arena floor, Dae-Hyun stood in the center of the battlefield, surrounded by 50 defeated warriors. His simple clothes were torn and dirty now, but he was still standing, still breathing, still very much alive. The arena fell completely silent. Medical teams rushed onto the floor to check on the fallen soldiers. Remarkably, all 50 were still alive. Injured, unconscious, but alive. Despite the overwhelming violence of the combat, the human had somehow managed to disable an entire military unit without killing anyone. In the viewing area, the few alien representatives who had stayed to watch sat in stunned silence. Rexstar had collapsed into his seat, his mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. "This is impossible," he whispered. "One being cannot fight 50 trained soldiers and win." Sujin looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. "Representative Rexstar, you are still thinking about this wrong. You believe this was 50 against 1, was it not?" "No," Sujin replied. "This was 50 Vorthak soldiers against 1 human operating under Protocol 5 restrictions." "What does that mean?" Sujin stood up and began gathering her diplomatic materials. "It means Dae-Hyun was still holding back. We have 15 engagement protocols. He has only ever used Protocol 3 in actual military service." The alien representative stared at her in shock. "What happens at Protocol 1? Klex asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sujin paused at the exit and looked back at him. "We pray we never have to find out." Down in the arena, Dae-Hyun was helping medical teams move the unconscious Vorthak soldiers to treatment areas. He moved carefully, making sure not to cause any additional injuries to warriors who had tried their best to kill him just minutes before. Commander, Thexaval watched the human work and realized that everything he thought he knew about warfare, about strength, about power itself, had been wrong. The Vorthak Empire had just learned that there were predators in the galaxy far more dangerous than they had ever imagined, and those predators preferred to heal rather than kill. 3 days after what galactic news networks were calling the Omega Massacre, representatives from 47 different species gathered in the station's main conference hall. They had come seeking answers to questions that were keeping entire civilizations awake at night. What were these humans? How was such power possible? And most importantly, what did they want? Sujin had agreed to address the assembly. She stood at the center of the circular chamber, looking small and harmless under the bright lights. Around her, dozens of alien beings leaned forward in their seats, desperate to understand what they had witnessed. "You have been asking the wrong questions," Sujin began, her gentle voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "You want to know what Dae-Hyun is? You want to know how he defeated your greatest warriors? You want to know if we are a threat to your civilizations?" She touched a control panel, and a holographic display appeared above the assembly. It showed a blue-green world that looked peaceful and beautiful from space. "This is Earth, our home world. Your xenobiological surveys classify it as a paradise planet. Rich atmosphere, abundant water, diverse climates, and complex ecosystems. What your classifications do not tell you is that every single day on this world was a battle for survival." The display zoomed in to show Earth's surface, massive storms that could level cities, earthquakes that split continents, volcanoes that could change global weather patterns, ice ages that lasted for thousands of years. "Your species evolved on worlds that were stable and safe," Sujin continued. "Ours evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill us. Every generation that survived was stronger, smarter, and more adaptable than the last." A new image appeared, showing Earth's prehistoric predators, creatures with teeth like swords, claws like spears, and the size of buildings. "We shared our world with hunters that your worst nightmares could not imagine. We learned to run faster, hide better, and fight more cleverly than anything else that lived. We had to. The alternative was extinction." Representative Yilmoth raised what might have been a hand. "But surely your species has moved beyond such primitive survival instincts. Surely you have evolved past the need for violence." Sujin's expression became sad. "Representative Yilmoth, that is exactly the wrong way to think about it. We did not evolve past violence. We evolved to be so good at violence that we could choose peace instead. She gestured to the display, which now showed human cities, art, music, and families. Everything beautiful that humans have ever created exists because we became strong enough to protect it. Our poetry exists because we could defend our poets. Our music exists because we could guard our musicians. Our children laugh and play because we made sure nothing could harm them. Commander Thexval, who had been granted permission to attend the assembly, leaned forward in his seat. But the power we witnessed, it defies explanation. How can flesh and bone defeat advanced technology and bioenhancement? Because you do not understand what you are fighting, Sujin replied. When Daehyun faced your champions, he was not using human technology or human weapons. He was using human knowledge. The display shifted to show cross-sections of various alien anatomies, including Vorthak physiology. For millions of years, humans studied every living thing on our world. We learned how bodies work, how nervous systems function, how to find the weak points in any creature we encountered. We had to learn these things to survive. She pointed to specific locations on the Vorthak anatomy chart. Daehyun knew exactly where to strike your champions because human medical knowledge is more advanced than your defensive systems. We know how bodies work better than the species that live in them. Rextar shifted nervously in his seat. The speed, the coordination, the ability to fight 50 opponents at once. Surely that requires some form of enhancement. Yes, Sujin agreed. It requires the enhancement that comes from spending your entire evolutionary history learning to process massive amounts of information under extreme stress. Human brains are not larger than yours, but they are structured differently. We can track multiple threats, analyze complex battle situations, and adapt our strategies in real time because our ancestors who could not do these things died. A new image appeared, showing human colonial ships in space. When we first encountered other species in the galaxy, we faced a choice. We could use our abilities to conquer and dominate, as many species before us had done. Or we could use our strength to protect and build. The display showed peaceful first contact scenarios, trade agreements, and cooperative scientific projects. We chose cooperation, but that choice came with conditions. Sujin touched her control panel again, and the display showed the combat protocols that had been mentioned during Daehyun's fights. We developed a system of restraints for our people who operate in galactic space. 15 different protocols that limit how much of our natural capabilities we are allowed to use in different situations. The gathered representatives stared at the protocol list in growing horror. Protocol 15 is for diplomatic meetings like this one. Our people operate at roughly 3% of their actual capability. Protocol 10 is for normal colony defense. Protocol 5 is for serious military threats. What about Protocol 1? Whispered Klex from the Vorthak delegation. Sujin paused for a long moment. Protocol 1 is for species extinction events. It has never been used and we pray it never will be. She gestured to another part of the display. Daehyun, whom you watched defeat your greatest warriors, operates under Protocol 7 restrictions during normal galactic interactions. In the arena, he was authorized to use Protocol 5, which allows him to access approximately 30% of his actual combat capability. The chamber fell completely silent as the implications sank in. You mean, Rextar said slowly, that what we witnessed was your warrior fighting at less than 1/3 of his actual strength? Correct. And there are protocols that allow even more? Correct. Commander Thexval stood up from his seat, his massive frame trembling. Why? Why do you limit yourselves? Why do you choose to hold back when you could dominate the entire galaxy? Sujin looked at him with genuine compassion. Because Commander Thexval, a galaxy full of slaves would be a very lonely place to live. We would rather have a galaxy full of friends. The display changed one final time, showing images of human colonies working alongside alien settlements, human scientists collaborating with alien researchers, and human children playing with alien children. This is what we chose instead of conquest. This is what we fight to protect. Not human dominance, but galactic cooperation. She turned to address the entire assembly. Your species are not our enemies. You are our neighbors. The Vorthak Empire made the mistake of believing that might makes right. They learned that they were only partially correct. What do you mean? Asked Yilmoth. Might does make right, Sujin replied. But true might is not the power to destroy. True might is the power to choose not to destroy. True might is the strength to build instead of tear down. The conference chamber remained silent for several minutes as the assembled representatives processed what they had learned. Finally, Commander Thexval spoke again. What happens now? What happens to the Vorthak Empire? Sujin smiled, and for the first time since the assembly began, it was a completely kind expression. Now, Commander, you get to learn what it means to be part of a galactic community, instead of rulers of a galactic empire, and I think you might find that much more satisfying than you expect. The display faded, leaving the chamber in natural light. Outside the viewing window, stars twinkled in the darkness of space. Those same stars now seemed different to the assembled representatives. They no longer looked like points of light marking territories to be conquered. They looked like beacons pointing the way toward a better future. 6 months later, the galaxy looked very different than it had before a human named Daehyun stepped into an arena on Omega-7 space station. The Vorthak Empire still existed, but it was no longer an empire. The species that had once ruled through fear and violence now found themselves learning entirely new ways to interact with their neighbors. The transition was not always smooth, but it was happening. Commander Thexval stood in what used to be his command center, watching reports flow in from across former Vorthak space. Instead of conquest updates and tribute collections, the screens now showed construction projects, trade agreements, and cultural exchange programs. Report from Sector 12 announced his aide Klex, though the title aide no longer carried the same meaning it once had. The agricultural systems are producing food surpluses for the first time in 40 years. The former slave populations are requesting additional farming equipment. Thexval nodded without taking his eyes off the displays. Approved. Send them whatever they need. It still felt strange to give orders that helped people instead of controlling them, but he was learning to find satisfaction in this new approach to leadership. The door to the command center opened and a familiar figure walked in. Daehyun looked exactly the same as he had in the arena 6 months ago. Simple clothes, calm expression, steady movements. But now Thexval knew what those gentle hands were capable of. Commander, the human said politely. I hope I am not interrupting. Not at all, Thexval replied. I was reviewing the integration reports. Your people continue to amaze me with their efficiency. Daehyun moved to stand beside the former Vorthak leader, studying the same displays. Integration is always difficult, but your people are adapting faster than we expected. It helps that the alternative was demonstrated so clearly, Thexval said with what might have been humor. Tell me, Daehyun, what was it like? Fighting in that arena? Knowing that the fate of the galaxy might depend on your actions? The human was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Sad, he said finally. Sad? I am a teacher, Commander. I spend my days helping children learn about the universe, about science and art, and all the beautiful things that intelligent beings can create together. Fighting is not what I wanted to be doing. Thexval looked at the human in surprise. You are a teacher? I thought you were a soldier. All humans are soldiers when they need to be, Daehyun explained. But that does not mean it is what we prefer to be. I would much rather spend my time showing young minds how to build than showing grown warriors how to fall. This was perhaps the most difficult thing for other species to understand about humans. They were not a warrior race in the traditional sense. They were a species that had become capable of incredible violence, but chose to use that capability to protect rather than conquer. What do you teach? Thexval asked. Basic physics and advanced chemistry to children ages 8 to 12, Daehyun replied. Though recently I have been developing a new curriculum about interspecies cooperation. The children are very excited to learn about Vorthak engineering techniques. The idea of this being teaching children how to understand Vorthak technology seemed impossible. But then again, most things about humans seemed impossible until you witnessed them. A communication alert chimed through the command center. Klex activated the display and Sujin's image appeared in holographic form. Commander Thexval Daehyun, she said with her usual kind smile. I hope I am not interrupting anything important. Not at all, Thexval replied. What news from the Galactic Council? Good news, mostly. The integration of former Vorthak territories is proceeding ahead of schedule. Most worlds have successfully transitioned to self-governance with advisory support from neighboring systems. She paused, and her expression became more serious. However, we have received reports of a new threat. The Razor fleet from the Andromeda sector has begun moving toward populated systems. Their leader, someone called Warmaster Kexthul, has announced his intention to fill the power vacuum left by the Vorthak Empire's transformation. Thexval felt his old warrior instincts stirring. What are their capabilities? Significantly more advanced than the Vorthak forces were, Su Jin replied honestly. Energy weapons that can crack planets, bioweapons that target specific genetic markers, reality disruption technology that we do not fully understand. And their numbers? Approximately 10,000 ships, each one carrying between 500 and 2,000 troops. They appear to be a true military civilization, with no civilian population to speak of. The numbers were staggering, even at the height of Vorthak power. They had never faced a threat of such magnitude. What does the Galactic Council propose to do? Daehyun asked. The Council is preparing defensive measures, but realistically, most species lack the military capability to resist this razor fleet. The Council has formally requested human assistance. Thexval looked at Daehyun with curiosity. Will your people help? Of course, the human replied without hesitation. That is what neighbors do for each other. But surely this threat is beyond what even humans can handle. Thexval asked. 10,000 warships against 12 humans operating under Protocol 2 authorization, Su Jin finished. The silence in the command center was absolute. 12? Klex whispered. Just 12 humans against 10,000 warships? Protocol 2 allows our people to operate at approximately 70% of their actual capability, Su Jin explained. 12 humans operating under Protocol 2 should be sufficient to deal with this threat. Thexval stared at the display screen showing the approaching Razor fleet. Each ship was a mobile fortress capable of destroying entire worlds. The combined firepower represented enough destructive force to sterilize hundreds of planets. What will you do? He asked. Daehyun was already moving toward the door. What we always do, Commander. We will protect our friends. Wait, Thexval called out. I want to help. The human stopped and turned back. Commander? The Vorthak people owe a debt to the galaxy for the pain we caused during our empire. Let us help repay that debt. My warriors know these ships and weapons. We can provide tactical support. Daehyun smiled. That would be appreciated, Commander. Thank you. As the human left the command center to prepare for another impossible battle, Thexval realized something that would have shocked his former Imperial self. He was no longer afraid of the approaching enemy fleet. He was no longer worried about the survival of his people or his civilization. For the first time in his life, he was on the same side as the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. And that meant his people were safe. The Razor fleet was about to learn the same lesson that the Vorthak Empire had learned 6 months ago. There were worse things in the universe than being conquered. There was making an enemy of humanity. 3 weeks later, galactic news networks would report that the Razor fleet had been defeated in what historians would call the shortest war in galactic history. The entire conflict lasted 47 minutes. War Master Kexthul would spend the rest of his life working in human agricultural colonies, learning to grow food instead of spreading destruction. Like many former conquerors, he would discover that building was more satisfying than destroying. And in classrooms across human space, teachers like Daehyun would continue their work, raising the next generation of humans who would carry forward the twin traditions of their species, the capacity for unimaginable violence, and the wisdom to choose peace instead. The galaxy was vast, and there would always be new challenges, new conflicts, and new species who believed that might made right. But now they knew that somewhere in the void, on ships full of farmers and teachers and artists, lived the humans, a species that had earned the right to speak softly by carrying the biggest stick in the galaxy. And they had chosen to use that stick to build, not destroy. In the end, that choice would prove to be the most terrifying weapon of all. 5 years had passed since the Omega Station incident changed the course of galactic history. The universe had settled into a new pattern of cooperation and mutual respect that would have seemed impossible during the days of Vorthak dominance. On a quiet colony world called New Harmony, children from 17 different species played together in a school playground. Their laughter echoed across the courtyard as they ran and climbed and explored with the boundless energy that all young beings seemed to share. Daehyun sat on a bench nearby, watching them with the satisfaction that came from seeing his work bear fruit. The playground had been built by cooperation between 6 different species, each contributing their unique engineering skills to create something better than any one civilization could have managed alone. Teacher Dae-hyun called out a young Vorthak child named Kexlin. "Can you help me with my math homework?" The human smiled and made room on the bench. The child scrambled up beside him, opening a data pad that showed problems involving interstellar navigation calculations. "This one is hard," Kexlin said, pointing to a complex equation. "I do not understand how the gravity wells work together." "Let me show you," Dae-hyun replied, taking the stylus and beginning to draw diagrams. "Think of space-time like a stretchy fabric. When you put heavy objects on it, they make dents." As he worked through the problem with his student, other children gathered around to watch. This had become a common occurrence. Dae-hyun's teaching methods made even the most difficult concepts seem simple and clear. "The trick," he explained as he drew gravitational field lines, "is understanding that the shortest path between 2 points is not always a straight line. Sometimes you have to curve around the obstacles." A young crystalline student named Zilnara raised her translucent hand. "Is that why human ships are so much faster than everyone else's?" "Because you understand the curves better?" "Partly," Dae-hyun replied. "But mostly it is because humans have been navigating difficult terrain for a very long time. We learn to find paths through dangerous places by necessity." An older student, a hive-born named Thickmore, looked up from his own homework. "Teacher, is it true that you once fought 50 Vorthak soldiers all by yourself?" The playground fell quiet as all the children turned to look at their teacher. Stories of the arena battles had become legendary across the galaxy, though most of the details had been exaggerated beyond recognition in the retelling. Dae-hyun set down the stylus and considered his answer carefully. These children lived in a peaceful time, but they deserved to understand the history that had made their peace possible. "Yes," he said simply, "I did fight those soldiers, but that is not the important part of the story." "What is the important part?" asked Kexlin. "The important part is what happened after the fighting stopped. The important part is that all those soldiers went home to their families. The important part is that their children now go to schools like this one, learning to build instead of destroy." A human child named Minsu, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "My mom says that humans are the strongest fighters in the galaxy. Is that true?" Dae-hyun looked at the mixed group of children surrounding him. Each species represented in this playground had once been enemies or strangers. Now they learned together, played together, and would grow up to build a future that none of their ancestors could have imagined. "Minsu," he said gently, "strength is not about how hard you can hit or how many enemies you can defeat. Real strength is about knowing when not to fight at all." He gestured toward the playground where children from former enemy species were, working together to build a castle in the sandbox. "Look at what they are creating together. That is strength. That is power. That is what makes the difference between a civilization that survives and a civilization that thrives." The school bell chimed, indicating that afternoon classes were about to begin. The children gathered their belongings and began heading toward the classrooms, chattering excitedly about their projects and homework. As they walked, Dae-hyun heard Kexlin explaining gravitational mathematics to Zilnara, while Thickmore and Minsu debated the best techniques for building sandcastles. These children did not see species differences as barriers to friendship or cooperation. To them, diversity was simply a source of new ideas and interesting perspectives. Dae-hyun followed them inside, but paused at the school's memorial wall. It contained images and names of beings from across the galaxy who had died during the conflicts that preceded the current era of peace. Vorthak soldiers, crystal warriors, human peacekeepers, and countless others who had fallen before cooperation replaced conquest. "Never again," he whispered, reading the inscription beneath the memorial. It was written in 17 different languages, but the meaning was universal. Teacher Dae-hyun, Minsu had come back to look for him. "Are you coming to class?" "Yes," he replied, turning away from the memorial. "What are we studying today?" "Advanced engineering principles," the boy said excitedly. "We are designing a space station that could house 1 million people from different species all working together." Dae-hyun smiled as they walked toward the classroom together. "That sounds like exactly the kind of project the galaxy needs." In classrooms across human space, similar scenes were playing out. Teachers who had once been soldiers were shaping young minds that would never know the fear and hatred that had driven previous generations to war. But the humans had not grown soft or complacent. The protocol still existed. The training continued. Every human child learned the same lessons that Daehyun had learned: how to fight, how to survive, how to protect what mattered. The difference was that they also learned when not to use those abilities. On distant monitoring stations, human observers tracked the movements of potentially hostile civilizations beyond the galaxy's edge. Early warning systems watched for signs of aggressive expansion or conquest-minded species that might threaten the peace that had been so carefully built. When such threats were detected, the response was swift and precise. Diplomatic contact was attempted first, offering the same choice that had been given to the Vorthak Empire: cooperation or consequences. Most species chose cooperation once they understood what the consequences might involve. In the command center of the human diplomatic vessel, Peace Through Strength, Captain Kyung-ho reviewed the latest intelligence reports. 3 new species had been contacted in the past month. 2 had immediately accepted offers of peaceful trade and cultural exchange. The third, a militaristic empire called the Iron Dominion, had responded to diplomatic overtures by destroying the messenger ship and declaring their intention to conquer all inferior species in the local sector. Orders from Earth. Command, his communications officer reported. The Iron Dominion is to be offered one final chance at peaceful resolution. And if they refuse, Protocol 4 authorization is pre-approved. Captain Kyung-ho nodded. Protocol 4 meant that human forces would be operating at roughly 50% of their actual capability, more than enough to handle most threats but not so much as to cause unnecessary destruction. Very well, send the message. Make it clear that this is their last opportunity to choose cooperation. The message was transmitted across space at faster-than-light speeds, carrying an ultimatum that was both generous and terrifying in its implications. The Iron Dominion could join the galactic community as equals, with all the benefits and protections that membership provided, or they could learn why the Vorthak Empire had chosen to transform itself rather than face the alternative. Back on New Harmony, Daehyun's afternoon class was deep in discussion about their space station design project. The students had quickly discovered that housing 1 million beings from different species required much more than just building a large structure. The atmospheric requirements alone are incredibly complex, observed Zilnara. Crystal people need low humidity, while swamp folk require high moisture levels. And the gravity sections, added Thickmore. Heavy worlders need 3 times standard gravity, but that would crush the flying people. So how do we solve it? Daehyun asked, guiding the discussion. Minsu raised his hand. We build multiple sections with different environments connected by transport tubes that can adjust conditions as people move between areas. Good thinking. What else? Kexlin consulted her notes. We need different types of food production systems, different recreational facilities, different religious and cultural spaces, and we need to make sure that all these different groups can work together effectively, added another. Student Daehyun watched with pride as his students worked through problems that had once seemed impossible to solve. These children were designing solutions for challenges that had driven earlier civilizations to war. But to them, diversity was not a problem to be eliminated. It was a resource to be utilized. Remember, he told them as the class period drew to a close, the goal is not to make everyone the same. The goal is to create a system where everyone can be different together. As the students filed out of the classroom, chattering about their assignments and plans for the next day, Daehyun reflected on how far the galaxy had come. Once, species had fought over resources and territory, believing that strength meant the ability to take what others had built. Now, children from those same species worked together to design better ways to share what they could build together. That transformation had not happened by accident. It had been purchased with blood and sacrifice and the willingness of beings like himself to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. But the real victory was not in the battles that had been won. The real victory was in the battles that would never need to be fought, because children like Minsu and Kexlin and Zilnara would grow up knowing that cooperation was stronger than conquest. Outside the classroom window, the sun was setting over New Harmony Colony. In the distance, ships from a dozen different species could be seen taking off and landing at the spaceport. carrying goods and people and ideas between the stars. The galaxy was finally living up to its potential, and in classrooms across that galaxy, teachers continued their work, raising the next generation that would carry that potential even further. The age of conquest was over. The age of cooperation had begun, and it was beautiful.